In this video, you will learn how I went through a betrayal and deep emotional pain. You will hear how, being on the verge of despair and alcoholic coma, I found the strength to start a new life, overcome my fears and regain my faith in the future, and who helped me with this. I will tell you about the steps I took to get back on my feet. Watch to the end to find out. My name is Christoph. I have always considered myself a person who knows what he wants from life and is always ready to fight for his family. I've been married for over 20 years, and all this time our family seemed to be holding on to strong pillars. My wife, Alicia, has always been the one woman for whom I was willing to change the world. But, as it turned out, over the years, our life has become completely different. Not so long ago, I was working in a good position, had a stable income, and Alicia and I were traveling and enjoying life. She was an active and charming woman, always radiating confidence and the ability to support me in difficult moments. We have 2 adult children, a daughter, Carolina, who is 23, and a son, Lukasz, who is 19. Both of them are already living their own lives. Carolina is studying at the university and is in a serious relationship, and Lukasz is going to do an internship abroad. Recently, it was just the 2 of us at home, Alicia and I. My job has always been something important to me, but one day it ended, and the world that seemed reliable and predictable cracked. The fact is that due to the company's reorganization, I lost my job. My position was considered one of the main ones, but suddenly it was just cut. It was amazing. I remember that day as if it were now. I was sitting in the office of the director who told me the news, trying not to look me in the eye. Alicia tried to cheer me up, telling me that life doesn't stop there, and that I would find something better. But my pride and guilt kept me going. I hoped that I would soon find a new job, but time passed and everything was in vain. I sent my resume to various companies, but I received fewer and fewer responses. I was despondent and felt worthless. My pride suffered from the realization that I could no longer support our family, and we started living off Alicia's income. She worked for our old company, but in a lesser position, although her experience and skills became important for the development of the company's new projects. At first glance, Alicia didn't seem to have changed, but I could feel her pulling away. Sometimes we would sit in the kitchen discussing something domestic, but her eyes became colder. She began to spend more time at work, and when she came home, she seemed to be far away in her mind. One evening we were sitting at the table, having dinner together, when Alicia suddenly looked up and said, "Christoph, you do realize that our life cannot stand still, right? I need to move forward, work on myself and my career. It's important not only for me, but for you and me as well." She was twirling her wine glass a little nervously in her hands, and I was feeling like I was on an exam, trying to understand what she was trying to tell me. "I understand everything, Alicia. You're doing a great job supporting your family. It's a little hard for me to accept, but I'm trying. Time will pass, and I will definitely find another job," I replied, although I felt unconvinced. She nodded, but I noticed a chill in her eyes. This look gave me some kind of ominous premonition. In the following days, she began to come home later and later, explaining that they had a lot of work to do. She mentioned that the company had a new project and that her boss, Mr. Dominic, had high hopes for her. Mr. Dominic. What did I know about him? He was a young and energetic leader, a man adored by his colleagues for his openness and charisma. He had joined the company 6 months earlier and quickly won the favor of the team. Alicia mentioned him with interest, and every time she spoke about him, her face would light up. I was a little worried about it, but I decided not to attach any importance to it. After all, we trusted each other. I felt uncomfortable every time she mentioned Dominic. I felt jealousy and uncertainty wash over me like a wave, but I held back. It seemed to me that this was just vain jealousy, it would not lead to anything good. I wanted to trust her without giving in to my own fears, which began to arise more and more often. But with each passing day, the feelings of awkwardness and doubt only grew stronger. I didn't know what exactly was bothering me, but I had a feeling inside that something important was changing or had already changed between us. In the following weeks, I tried to focus on myself, on my new projects. I started working from home on a small startup that I had always had in mind but hadn't had time for before. Working at the computer at night, I wanted to prove to myself that I could still achieve something. But despite all my efforts, I still felt imperfect and unsuccessful. Alicia noticed my efforts, but now every "you did well," she said, sounded like a strange tone of either irony or fatigue. She disappeared from the house more and more often, staying late at the company's various corporate events. "It's an important part of the job," she explained to me once when I brought up the subject during dinner. A slight smile flashed across her face, as if she understood something I couldn't. "Christophe, you realize that I have more responsibilities now," she said once, when I reproached her for not spending more time at home. "All these meetings and negotiations are part of my job. You know, I do it for our family. We need money, and I need to grow as a professional. Don't worry, I believe you will find a job you like." But until then, she stopped talking, giving me a sympathetic look. These words cut me unpleasantly. She had always been ambitious, and I liked that. But now her ambitions suddenly began to look like they were higher than our relationship, like I was suddenly no longer an important part of her life. After another such conversation, I began to notice another strange thing. When Alicia talked about the future, her "we" was gradually replaced by "I." It was a small detail, but it struck me. It became difficult for me to withstand these changes. I began to immerse myself even more in my work, hoping to find a new meaning in life, to regain my self-respect. My distance from Alicia was growing every day, but I was afraid to talk about it. My pride did not allow me to admit that I had lost not only my job but also my self-confidence. I didn't want to appear weak, didn't want to admit that I felt forgotten in my own family. One evening, when Alicia returned from another work party, I decided to wait for her to come home. I was sitting in the kitchen, reading the news on my phone, when I heard her walk into the house, gingerly. "What are you doing up?" she asked, pulling her keys out of her bag. "I wanted to wait for you," I replied. "Did you have fun?" I tried to smile, but felt a tense mask on my face. "It was just an ordinary meeting, nothing more." She looked away, looking at the kitchen cabinet. "And what kind of project are you launching now? I haven't heard anything about it, and you're talking about it so enthusiastically," I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "It's hard to explain," she said, after a pause. "There are a lot of new things, but nothing is finalized yet. I don't want to burden you with the working details." Her answer was evasive, and I sensed something in it that I had never noticed in her voice before, a certain coolness and reluctance to explain. Every time I tried to establish contact, I ran into a silent wall. Over time, I began to notice that Alicia no longer looked at me the way she used to. Before, when we talked, she always looked me in the eye, listened with interest, and even encouraged me when something went wrong. But now her eyes were often distracted, her gaze became absent, and I could see that she was thinking somewhere far away. One day I caught myself thinking that someone else had come into our house. No, not in the literal sense. This someone was rather between us, like an invisible wall that separated us whenever we were alone. When we had dinner, this invisible someone sat at our table, and when she went to bed, he stayed by her side. I felt that this someone was taking her time, attention, and thoughts. My suspicion grew. I tried to find answers, but I was afraid to ask questions directly. Could it be that Alicia, who had once been my support, was now pulling away from me? Every time I dared to have a serious conversation, she would quickly change the subject or explain her actions because of her workload. A few months ago, when I lost my job, I wanted to show Alicia that I would not give up, that our family was above all else. But now it seemed to me that I had lost something, and this loss had become invisible even to both of us. My Alicia was turning into a completely different person, and it scared me. What worried me even more was that she started using her phone as soon as she was alone. I knew we had to trust each other, but one night when she went into another room, I couldn't stand it and decided to check her phone. A strange excitement gripped me when I saw that it was protected by a new password that I did not know. We had never shared passwords before, and it caused me to feel a flurry of emotions. I felt anger, sadness, and shame for my suspicion. But at the same time, I realized that she was hiding something from me. Every day the tension grew. We became silent neighbors living in the same house, but no longer a team. I tried not to show my irritation and continued to look for a job, but our relationship was getting colder. Nothing was happening, but at the same time everything was happening. It was this something that we tried to ignore that was destroying our relationship from the inside. One day, during our next dinner, I noticed her gaze stopping somewhere in the distance. It was as if Alicia did not hear me and was not here with me. "Alicia, can you hear me?" I asked, holding my fork in my hand. She flinched and immediately looked up, smiling. "I'm sorry, I was thinking a little bit," she replied, but I saw that it was just another excuse. "What's wrong?" "It's like you're not with us," I tried to keep my tone even though my heart was pounding. "I'm just tired, Christophe, that's all," she replied shortly. That evening I couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about every conversation we had, every moment when I noticed her detachment. I realized that somehow I had changed, but I didn't want to admit that we had grown so far apart that we felt like strangers. Finally, when the next work week began, Alicia told me that she would need to go on a business trip for a few days. She explained that it was an important part of her job, that the company had assigned her a new project that required her personal involvement. Her voice was calm and confident, as always, but I felt subconsciously that this trip meant much more to her. "Are you sure you won't mind if I go?" she asked, trying not to meet my eyes. I nodded, even though my heart was clenched. I knew I could never stop her, and I had no right to. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel anxious, growing with each moment she was gone. My jealousy was getting stronger and stronger, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I trusted her, but at the same time, I had a suspicion in my heart that was nagging at me. That evening, when I got home, Alicia was already waiting for me in the kitchen. She was not preparing dinner as usual, not looking for anything in the refrigerator. She was just sitting at the table, leaning slightly on her elbows, looking at me with some incomprehensible, even cold expression on her face. I felt that the conversation would be difficult, but I didn't know how painful it would be. "Christophe, we need to talk," she said, and these words sent shivers down my spine. Her voice was calm, almost colorless, as if she were speaking to a stranger. "Of course I'm listening," I replied, trying to keep my tone normal, although the feeling of anxiety was strong. "You know, there are a lot of changes in the company right now," she said as if I had no idea what she was doing, and I realized that this is my opportunity. An opportunity that can open new doors for me. But it requires certain sacrifices. She paused, looking directly at me. I was silent, not taking my eyes off her. It seemed as if her next words could tear us apart like two ships going in different directions after a storm. "On Friday, I'm not going on a business trip, I'm going on vacation." She stopped talking, as if watching my reaction. A vacation? Was it supposed to be a business trip? "What are your plans?" My surprise grew. Everything that was happening did not fit in my head. "It will be a business vacation," she finally said, looking me in the eye. "I'm going with Dominic." She stopped and looked away, as if she had said something mundane, as if it were nothing important. I couldn't hide my surprise, which quickly turned into indignation. "You mean you're going with him? Why with him? It must be work. Why is such a vacation necessary for your career?" I tried to keep my composure, although my anxiety was growing with every passing second. "It's hard to explain, Christophe," she replied, shrugging her shoulders. "I'm currently the head of the department, but I have a chance to become deputy director. This is a great opportunity for me and for our family. Dominic thinks we could discuss some of the project details in an informal setting. That's what all successful people do, you have to understand that." She looked at me as if I was the one who didn't understand the basic truths of life, as if I was a naive boy still living in a world of illusions. And then I realized that this was not just a business trip, it was something more. "Are you saying you're going to spend a few days at the resort with him? What is this possibility that you are going to discuss on vacation?" Alicia, this is incompatible with any norms. I tried to collect my thoughts, although the shock did not allow me to think soberly. Don't be so naive, Christophe, she replied, smiling slightly. Sometimes you have to make decisions that are difficult to understand. And this is my decision. I'm willing to make it for the sake of our future. This, our, sounded as if she was trying to justify her action, to distance any negative emotions from it. She was using this word to hide her true motivation, and I felt a sense of resentment. I felt the world around me start to shake, and I had to take a breath to keep myself from losing control. Our future? I looked up at her, barely able to contain myself. What about our present? Do you really think I can accept this? That you're going to go somewhere with another man and call it a sacrifice for the sake of the family? Her expression was unwavering. She continued to sit there, looking at me as if I were someone who didn't understand the situation. Christophe, you have to understand that things are not the same today, she shrugged. I earn money, I provide for my family, and I have ambitions. If you can't understand that, I'm sorry. But I'm not going to turn down an opportunity that could change my life. Your life? What about our lives? Alicia, this is not what we agreed on when we promised to support each other. I could barely stop myself from screaming. The feelings of disappointment and betrayal rolled over me like waves on the shore. We're not the same anymore, she sighed, and that's because I'm trying to grow up, Christophe. You see how we live, you're trying to find yourself, and I'm making a career. This is what happened, and we have to accept it. I hope you can see the benefits it will bring. Sitting in front of her, I could see that Alicia was not going to compromise at all. Her words that she was doing all this for us, for the sake of the family, sounded like an empty phrase, like a cold excuse that had nothing to do with the truth. She looked at me with superiority, as if I were just a break on her path. I felt my heart beating faster and my mind blurring with pain. It seemed like something final, like a sentence that could not be appealed. I was silent, trying not to lose my temper, but the pain of her words was as sharp as a knife blade. Don't get me wrong, she finally said, standing up and giving me one last look. I have to do this, and I hope you will find the strength to support me, as you promised at the beginning of our journey. She walked away, leaving me in the empty kitchen, full of confusion and indescribable pain. I couldn't understand if it was a real betrayal or just my fear, but one thing was clear, our relationship had changed forever. I sat there thinking over every word she said, every gesture she made. I remember how everything in me was boiling with the desire to stop her, to prevent this humiliation. But I couldn't move. The pain and disappointment were so strong that I just sat there as if paralyzed, listening to the silence of the house that had now become unfamiliar. I began to spend the following days in a kind of frustration, trying to find something rational in her actions, something that would justify her. But there was no explanation in my mind that could relieve me of the feeling of humiliation and brokenness. The next morning I woke up with a feeling of emptiness. Alicia acted as if nothing special had happened, as if the previous conversation was just a brief exchange that had already been forgotten. She dressed in her usual formal style, kissed me on the cheek, and went to work without even looking at me. Her indifference cut me sharper than any words. I stayed in our silent house, feeling a heavy lump growing in my chest. Instead of finding any rational explanation for her behavior, I felt like I was at a crossroads with no way out. I wanted to talk about it with someone, to share this pain, to find support, but I couldn't imagine telling even my closest friends about it. My whole life seemed scattered, like shards of broken glass that I was trying to put back together, even if some pieces were already lost forever. That day, I tried to do my work, to immerse myself in a routine to distract myself, but my thoughts kept coming back to Alicia and what she was going to do. She easily told me that she was going to go on vacation with another man, and it seemed cruel and incredible at the same time. Had I become so indifferent to her that she didn't even see the need to hide it from me? Or was it her way of humiliating me, of making me feel worthless? Or maybe she really believed that it wasn't a betrayal, but just a sacrifice for the sake of the future? Late in the evening, I finally heard the door open. Alicia came into the house, as always, confident and calm. I was sitting in the kitchen, with a cup of cold coffee in front of me, not taking my eyes off her face as she entered the room. "What's wrong? Why aren't you sleeping?" she asked, stopping and looking down at me as if I were a child who had made some minor scene. "I can't sleep when I know my wife is going to leave with another man," I replied, unable to contain my harsh tone. "Do you have any idea what that looks like for me? Or do you not think I need to explain it to you anymore?" She sighed, showing no surprise. On the contrary, she seemed to be preparing for this conversation. "Christoph, I've already explained all this to you. This is an important step for my career, and I'm not going to change my plans just because of your reaction. You see, I've long been tired of everything in our family being up to me. I have the right to choose, and this is a choice I'm making for the sake of our future. If you can't accept that, there's nothing I can do about it." Her voice was calm and even a little indifferent. She was saying her words like a text from a well-memorized roll, and that made it even worse. I felt that she wasn't even trying to understand my feelings, that she didn't see any weight in my words. "Alicia, you're talking about this as if our relationship doesn't mean anything to you anymore. I have always supported you, helped you in every way I could. But what do I get in return? You easily announce your plans to go with him as if it were just a business trip, but we both know there's more to it than that." She looked at me as if I was talking nonsense. There was cold determination in her eyes, and finally she answered, quietly but clearly. "Do you want the truth, Christoph? Okay. We don't just work together with Dominic. He is an interesting man, he knows how to listen to me, he appreciates my work. He sees me as the person I want to be, not as someone who needs to be supported. This is important to me, and I'm not going to give it up." Her words hit me like a blow. My heart contracted, as if something big and heavy had fallen inside. I sat there in silence, unable to comprehend what she had just said. "So you're saying that he's more to you than me?" I said, barely able to contain myself. "I don't want you to see it that way, but I guess you're right," she replied, slightly dismissive. "We need to make changes, and I can't live in constant fear of what's going to happen next. You've stayed stuck, Christoph, and I want to move forward. I've stayed where I am? Do you seriously think that's what I wanted?" I felt myself getting angry again. I lost my job, I tried to find a way out of the situation I was in, and that doesn't mean I stopped developing. I'm still fighting, just not in the way you imagine. Fighting? Christoph, you look more like a person who just goes with the flow, trying to find excuses for his own defeats. And I don't want to be part of that, you know? I'm tired of waiting for you to become the man you used to be, and maybe you never will be. Dominic sees something in me that I haven't seen in myself in a long time, and I'm not going to waste this chance. Her words cut me like a blade. I didn't know how to react to it. I wanted to scream, to tell her everything that had accumulated in my soul, but the words did not come. They seemed to be stuck somewhere inside, not wanting to come out. "So you don't want anything more from me? Do you think we can't be together anymore?" I finally asked, trying to contain my anger and despair. She smiled a little, but it was cold and dismissive. "To be honest, I think we need to take a break. I feel like I deserve something more than the life you have to offer me right now. That's the truth, Christoph, and I don't want to hide it." She got up from her seat and calmly walked to the bedroom without even looking back at me. It seemed that this was her last conversation with me, the end of our journey together, which had long since ended for her. And I was left sitting there, full of despair and confusion, feeling that our life together, which I thought was strong and reliable, was falling apart before my eyes. That night I could not sleep. I lay there staring into the darkness, trying to understand what had happened to us. Did everything we had built for so many years really end so quickly and painlessly for her? Does she really see me as someone who prevents her from achieving what she wants? I felt backed into a corner, with no hope of reconciliation or clarification. And the next morning when I woke up, there was no one in the house. She had gone back to work, leaving me with a feeling of emptiness and cold indifference. The following days were hard, each new morning seemed harder than the last. Alicia and I hardly spoke, and this silence seemed so thick and impenetrable, as if a fog had settled in our house that did not want to dissipate. She acted as if I had become just furniture, a mindless object taking up space in her life. I tried to ignore the pain, tried to find something to do, but everything was falling apart. My self-confidence, the loss of my job, all of this now seemed even more meaningless against the backdrop of what we were losing with her. I kept asking myself, how did we get to this point? What happened to the people who were once ready to go through everything together? A week had passed in this depressing atmosphere when, on Friday, Alicia walked into the bedroom with her traveling suitcase ready to leave. I watched her, sitting on the edge of the bed, and tried to find words that could stop her, but I couldn't. All I felt was some kind of angry powerlessness and at the same time an amazing peace, as if my body had long ago surrendered and only a shell remained. She gave me a quick glance, as if to see if I still had the strength to protest, and then simply nodded. "I'm leaving," she said. Her voice sounded almost businesslike, dry and detached, like someone going on a routine business trip. "Why are you doing this to me?" I finally found the strength to say, "We've been together for so many years, we've been through so much, and now you're throwing it all away for him?" She sighed and, lowering her eyes slightly, answered. "You'll never understand. It's not about him, it's about me. I need more than what I have now. If you don't want to understand, then I'm sorry, but I can't live in this space anymore, where I'm just waiting for you to change something. I want to live my life, not wait for you to return to the person you used to be." I didn't have enough words to express all the pain that was tearing me up inside. She left me no chance. Everything was decided for her. She left as if I was someone who simply did not meet her expectations. Alicia came to the door and suddenly stopped. "Listen, I'm going away for a week. If you decide that you want to talk and you can see this situation differently than you do now, then maybe we can find some kind of compromise. But at the moment, I see no other way out than to take a break. I need to be alone, to look at our life from the outside." "A pause?" I repeated irritably. "A pause is when we take time to sort ourselves out, not when you go to a resort with your boss." She shrugged her shoulders as if my words had no meaning. "That's your point of view, Christoph. You can think what you want, but I've already made my decision. I hope you realize this and can find the strength to change." She turned and left the room without turning around. A few minutes later, I heard the front door closing and footsteps moving away. I was left alone, feeling like my whole life had fallen apart and there was no way to put it back together. Over the next few days, I experienced a real emotional storm. I was overcome with indescribable indignation and bitter sadness. I tried to hold on as best I could, but everything in the house reminded me of her. Every corner of this house held our memories, every object was a witness to the life we had built together and which was now crumbling before my eyes. I tried not to think about the fact that she was with him now. But these thoughts came on their own, uninvited, filling my mind like a toxic fog from which it was impossible to hide. I imagined her having fun, laughing with him, giving all her attention to another man, while I was left alone in this empty house. One evening I just couldn't stand it anymore and went to a bar. I sat in the corner, drinking one glass of strong drink after another, trying to drown out the pain. Other people were sitting next to me, busy with their own problems, and I felt as if I were cut off from the world, as if I were in a transparent cage with no way out. "You look like you've been run over by a train," I suddenly heard a familiar voice. Standing next to me was my old friend Pavel, who worked for the same company where I used to hold my position. "Pavel, to be honest, I feel even worse than I look," I replied, not even trying to hide my depression. He ordered himself a beer and, sitting down opposite me, looked at me with understanding. "I heard you're not in the best shape right now. I'm sorry I didn't call you earlier, but we're all going through a tough time. Layoffs, downsizing. Hell, we're living in a minefield." I just nodded, remembering how it all started. My losing my job was the first blow that destroyed our life together. But now it all seemed so distant and unimportant compared to what I was experiencing now. "It's not just the job, Pavel. Everything's gone wrong. Alicia, she decided that she didn't want to stay with me anymore, I said reluctantly, but Powell could tell by my tone. He listened in silence as I poured out my heart, telling him how she was planning her life without me, how she had openly stated that she needed something else. Powell remained silent, but his face reflected real compassion. "Christophe, listen to me," he said after a long pause. "I know it won't help much now, but maybe it's all for the best. Maybe you deserve someone who appreciates you for who you are. I don't know, but, if she decided to leave, maybe it's better now than in a few years when it will hurt even more." His words caused me to have conflicting feelings. On the one hand, I knew he was right. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that our life together was something more than just living together. She was everything to me, and even though the pain was tearing me apart from the inside, I couldn't bear the thought that it was all in vain. I returned home late at night. Silence filled the whole house, and this silence was becoming unbearable. I went to bed, but no sleep came. It seemed to me that it was not just a quarrel, but something more, like the end of a whole chapter of my life. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my alarm and saw that I had received a message on my phone. It was a short message from Alicia. "Hi. I hope you realize that I made this decision for a reason. It's important to me. Think about what we discussed. Maybe you need some time alone." I sat there, holding the phone in my hands, and felt anger and despair wash over me. How could she accept all this so easily? She didn't even see the need to discuss it again, didn't try to explain. Her decision had already been made, and nothing depended on me. That morning was a turning point. I realized that everything had changed, and there was no going back. Our life, which I had been building with her for years, had fallen apart. After the last message from Alicia, I felt the world around me start to crumble, leaving only emptiness. Despair and anger replaced each other, tossing me from one side to the other like a boat in a storm. I felt betrayed, devastated and humiliated. The most depressing thing was that she didn't even try to explain or find some way to reconcile. She just made her decision and left. And now, despite all my attempts to understand or justify her actions, I was left alone with my own pain and doubts. Every new day was like a nightmare from which it was impossible to wake up. I stopped going out, rarely saw my friends, because even the thought of explaining my situation to someone made me feel ashamed. My friends and acquaintances used to see me as energetic and always confident, but now I felt completely devastated and helpless. After several sleepless nights, I found myself in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a bottle of cheap wine. I hadn't drunk in years, but now I couldn't find a better way to drown out my thoughts and pain. It seemed to me that alcohol was the only thing that could save me from this hopelessness, from this unbearable silence that now reigned in my house. I took the first sip, trying to find at least temporary relief. But it did not come. So I took another drink. That was how the first night passed. And it was followed by another, and another. Days mixed with nights, and I could no longer distinguish where one day ended and another began. I could not find meaning in anything, because my main support had disappeared, and with it, everything that had once been important to me disappeared. I used to think that we were a team, that together we could overcome any difficulties, but now I realized that it was just an illusion. One evening I went to a local bar. There, among strangers, I could hide, escape loneliness at least for a moment. Sitting at the bar, I could see people circling around me, laughing, talking, living. They didn't seem to care about any problems, and this only made my despair worse. I felt out of this world, unnoticed and unnecessary, like a ghost that no longer belonged to this life. When I returned home, the rooms seemed even more empty and cold. I didn't even try to go to bed. I just sat down on the floor with my hands on my head and felt the pain tearing me apart from the inside. All those images, memories that we had built together with her were now just tearing my soul apart. I was exhausted, but no sleep came. Only bitterness and despair. Every morning I woke up with the same thought: how did it happen that I ended up here, in this state? And there was no answer. Every time I tried to put my thoughts together, to remember the good moments, I immediately returned to her betrayal, to the indifference with which she told me she was leaving. Several times I received calls from Pavel, the same friend I had met at the bar. He tried to cheer me up, offered to meet up, go for a walk or just have coffee, but I didn't see any point in it. I didn't want him to see me so weak and broken. I couldn't even admit to myself that I had lost everything that mattered to me, and now I couldn't find the strength to start over. Alcohol became my constant companion. With each new bottle, I felt like I was losing myself a little bit. My confidence, my will, all of it was dissolving in senseless drunkenness. I knew that I was falling deeper every day, but I couldn't find the strength to stop. My life turned into a purposeless existence with no love or joy, only pain and despair. One morning, when I woke up again with a heavy head after another night of drinking, I suddenly felt fear. I realized that I was losing control of my life, that alcohol had become a substitute for everything that was important to me. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a man I barely recognized, tired, with a puffy face and dull eyes. It wasn't me, it was a man who was giving up and letting pain destroy him. I realized that I could not go on like this. But I did not know what to do next. The next days passed slowly, and I tried to ignore my pain. I almost completely gave up alcohol, but the feeling of emptiness did not disappear. Every day was like the previous one, and it seemed to me that I was wandering in a dark maze with no way out. I couldn't find a place for myself and didn't know how to start all over again. I continued to be tormented by doubts, and, frankly, I did not believe that I could get out of this state. One morning I received a call from Pavel. He was trying to get me to talk to him again, and I decided that maybe I needed support, as hard as it was to admit. We met in a cafe, where he calmly listened to my story without interrupting me. I told him about the pain, frustration, and despair that haunted me day after day. I expected his usual words of comfort, but this time he behaved differently. "Christoph," Pavel began, looking at me thoughtfully, "it seems to me that you have lost your bearings in life. And believe me, in your situation, this is normal. But if you want to regain your confidence and strength, you need to start with yourself." I sighed, not believing that there was anything left in me to start with. With myself? Pavel, I'm not sure I'm even the same person I used to be. Alicia destroyed all my beliefs, my dreams and goals. How can I rebuild myself after all this? Pavel took a book out of his backpack with a smile and put it in front of me. It was a small book with a bright cover. "Is this an ordinary self-help book?" I asked skeptically, looking at the cover. "It's more than just a book," he replied, "it's a step-by-step action plan to help you get out of the state you're in now. It won't change your life overnight, but it will help you focus on yourself, find the pieces you've lost. I know it sounds trite, but it really works if you're willing to put in the effort." I picked up the book, flipped through a few pages, and shrugged my shoulders. Not that I really believed in such things, but I felt like I was losing myself and I needed something to hold on to. "Okay," I sighed, taking the book with me, "I guess it can't hurt. If it helped someone else, maybe it will work for me." Pavel nodded, and I felt his genuine support, which was extremely important to me at that moment. He wished me good luck and finally encouraged me with words that gave me a little bit of hope. "Remember that all trials are only part of the journey. You will get through it and become stronger. But first you need to learn to love yourself again, and then you will realize what you really need." When I got home, I sat down on the couch with a book in my hands, feeling a small spark of interest awakening somewhere inside me. Opening the first page, I came across an introduction that suggested leaving everything behind and focusing on yourself, even if it seems impossible. I realized that this text seemed to be addressed to me, a person who is lost in life and does not know how to get out of this circle. The first chapter suggested that I identify what was really important to me and what was just a false idea of happiness. The author argued that we often sacrifice ourselves, our dreams and values in order to meet other people's expectations, and this leads us to deep disappointment. I realized that many of my decisions were really dictated by the desire to impress Alicia, to be perfect for her, but in the process I lost my own self. This chapter made me think. For the first time in a long time, I started asking myself questions. What is really important to me? What do I want, regardless of other people's expectations? These were difficult questions that I couldn't answer right away, but I realized that I had to find the answer if I wanted to get out of this situation. The next section suggested that I make a list of my personal goals, even if they were the simplest ones. I tried to do it. At first, I wrote a few trivial things: find a new job, travel, meet friends. But with each new item, I felt that I needed to dig deeper, so I started writing down more personal goals: to restore inner peace, to find something that brings me joy, to believe in myself. This simple list gave me extraordinary confidence. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I could influence my life. I realized that I had the ability to create a new future, no matter how circumstances turned out. Returning to the book every day, I began to complete step-by-step tasks that helped me regain my lost energy and restore my faith in myself. One of the chapters recommended exercising to release negative emotions and improve mood. I decided it was a good idea and joined a gym. Every new day was like a small victory, like a step towards a new life. I could feel my body gradually regaining strength, and my spirit along with it. Physical activity became for me not only a way to keep fit, but also a way to release accumulated stress. Over time, I started working on my negative thoughts. The author of the book advised me to replace every negative thought with a positive one, even if it looks artificial at first. So I tried it. At first, it seemed like a futile exercise, but every day I began to feel my perception change. I no longer looked at myself as a victim of circumstances. I began to see myself as a person capable of changing my life and finding new meaning in it. As I followed the advice in the book, I felt that I was beginning to feel differently about everything that happened between Alicia and me. Instead of blaming her or myself, I began to see it as a lesson, as an experience that would give me strength and wisdom. Instead of feeling betrayed, I decided to focus on what I could do to rebuild my life. Over time, I even stopped feeling hatred for Alicia. I realized that she had made her choice, and that choice didn't have to determine my future. She left, and now I am in charge of my life. I took back control, and it was a liberation I hadn't even counted on. Thanks to the book, I also realized that it is important for me to find a new meaning, and it doesn't have to be connected to someone else. I realized that my happiness depends only on me, on my willingness to work on myself and change. This process was not easy, but it gave me a new direction. A month passed since I started working on myself, and life gradually took on new colors. I was becoming more confident, feeling how old resentments were gradually losing their sharpness. Every day I realized that my pain was becoming a thing of the past, and something else was replacing it: calmness and inner balance. I was returning to myself, to the person I used to be, but with new strength and understanding. My attitude towards Alicia also changed. Instead of anger, I felt a kind of cold indifference towards her. Her choice no longer had the power to influence my life, because now I had my own path. I was no longer trying to find fault or excuses. What happened no longer belonged to my present, and I was ready to close this chapter to start a new one. All this time, I continued to train, read books, worked on my goals, and took small but important steps towards my new life every day. I met several interesting people at the gym, and this was another sign to me that life was not over. On the contrary, it was just beginning, now with new opportunities and a new view of myself. One day I realized that I was ready to take another step. I no longer wanted to live in a house where everything reminded me of the past. These walls held not only our shared memories, but also the pain I had experienced, and I decided it was time to get rid of this burden. I started planning my departure from this place as if it were something festive and expected. I sat down at my desk, pulled out a notebook and started writing down everything I needed to do in order to leave. Step by step, I made a plan for my future. I knew I needed to find a new place to live, maybe another city where I could start from scratch. I was overwhelmed with a sense of freedom and independence that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The next morning, when I woke up, I felt ready to take decisive action. I started packing, sorting everything that belonged to me. Every item I picked up seemed to be a part of my past life, but now I looked at it in a completely different way. I no longer felt any attachment to this place, to these walls that had seen everything, from our first joyful moments to the last scenes of disappointment and alienation. My new calmness surprised even me. I saw myself as confident and ready for any change. I was not afraid of the unknown, on the contrary, it gave me motivation. I became the master of my life again, and this feeling was so strong that I could no longer stay in one place. Every day seemed like a new chance to start, and now I knew how to use this chance. When Alicia returned home after her vacation, which lasted not a week but a month, she found me with my suitcases at the door. Her look was mixed. It seemed that she did not expect to see me like this, confident, ready to leave. She stood on the threshold, looking at me in surprise, as if she didn't recognize me. "Christophe. What does this mean?" she asked, not hiding her surprise. "It means that I'm leaving, Alicia," I answered calmly. "You've made your choice, and I've made mine. There is no point in us staying together anymore. Your life is yours, and mine is mine. And I no longer have any intention of becoming an obstacle for you." She was silent, trying to find some words, but her face showed confusion. It seemed that she was expecting a completely different reaction, begging, desperation, attempts to hold her. But it didn't happen. I stood in front of her calmly and confidently, as if I had made this decision long ago and was now simply implementing it. "I don't understand. Do you really want to just leave? We can try again, find a way to understand each other," she said, but her voice was more confused than confident. I just smiled, looking into her eyes. "Alicia, maybe one day I would have done it, if the man you knew was still around. But he disappeared, and another man appeared. Now I know what I want, and it no longer depends on you. I am grateful that we were together, but this chapter of our lives is closed." She stood there as if struck by lightning, and I could feel her gradually beginning to realize that her decision had unexpected consequences. Perhaps she thought that I would always be there for her, ready to accept any of her decisions, but now she saw a person who had decided to become independent and self-reliant. I took my things without saying another word. Leaving this house, I felt relieved. Every step was like throwing away an old burden that kept me tied to the past. I walked knowing that everything that was left behind no longer had power over me. I was no longer a hostage to my feelings and circumstances. When I left the house, I did not turn back. I heard the door close behind me, and I felt myself letting go of the last connection to my past life. I stepped out into the world, free and ready to start a new chapter filled with possibilities that I was just beginning to discover. I walked towards my new apartment, which I had already found and prepared for myself. It was a small space, but it was completely mine, and that was all that mattered to me. There were no memories in this place, nothing that would remind me of my previous life. It was a blank canvas on which I could start writing a new story. In the new apartment, I started to set up shop, and it was like a symbolic act of renewal for me. I bought new furniture, chose some paintings for the walls that inspired me and created a sense of calm. It was my place, a place where I felt free from any pressure or expectations. It was a space where I could be myself, free from the past. In the evening, sitting down with a cup of hot tea, I felt that I had finally found peace with myself. All those memories that used to be painful no longer had any power over me. I realized that despite everything that had happened, I had become stronger. And now I knew that I could pass any test. The next morning I went to the gym, as I had been doing for the past few months, but this time I felt completely different. Every step was conscious, every exercise was a way to build not only physical strength, but also inner strength. I knew that everything was just beginning, and now I was ready to embrace this new path I had chosen for myself. After the workout, I went to my favorite cafe, where I started writing down my thoughts in my diary over a cup of coffee. I set goals for myself again, but now they concern only me. Now I know what I want, and I go for it with a clear mind and inner peace. Now I am independent, strong, and ready for whatever lies ahead. A few days have passed since I finally said goodbye to my home, leaving the past behind. Everything that had once held me together was now just a memory that had lost its hold on me. I settled into my new apartment, feeling free and independent. I felt good, and this feeling was so new that sometimes I even doubted whether it was real. Soon I realized that I had to talk to my children. Despite the breakup with Alicia, my relationship with my children remained extremely important to me, and I didn't want them to find out through rumors or an unexpected meeting. They deserved honesty. In addition, I wanted them to know that the decision to separate from their mother did not mean that I was disappearing from their lives. I called them and suggested that we meet at a cozy cafe that we all loved and that was always a place where we could talk in peace. I remembered how we used to come here all together, those rare moments when our family ties seemed real and strong. Now, as I sat there alone, waiting for them, a wave of sadness rolled over me. It was sadness that family memories would not be the same as before. Finally, the children came to the cafe and I saw their familiar faces. They looked a little tense, obviously feeling that the conversation would not be easy. We exchanged hugs and they sat down next to me at the table. We were silent for a minute, but this silence was not awkward, it was rather preparing us for what I was about to tell them. "Dad, we've been wanting to talk to you for a long time," Alya, my eldest daughter, began, looking me in the eye. "We noticed something had changed, but we didn't want to bother you with questions." I nodded, trying to find the right words to explain the situation to them. "Children," I began, sighing, "you are both adults, and I have always wanted you to know the truth. So I'm not going to hide it. Your mother and I are no longer on the same path. We have made our choice, and I no longer intend to go back to what we had before." Andrei, my son, listened attentively, but his face showed incomprehension. It was harder for him to understand everything that happened between Alicia and me, because he had always seen us as a single entity. His idea of our marriage was simple and perhaps even idealistic. "But why?" he asked, his voice full of doubt. "I thought that you and Mom, that you two would always be together." I smiled sadly, feeling that I had to be as honest as possible. "I used to think so, too, son," I replied, putting my hand on his shoulder, "but sometimes life goes differently than we plan. Your mother and I have drifted apart, and it's irreversible. She made her choice, and I made mine. I want you both to understand that this decision has nothing to do with you. You will always be the most important people to me, and I will be there for you, no matter how long it takes." Alya nodded, and I could see that she was beginning to understand. Her eyes became serious, and she took my hand, squeezing it as if to give me support. "We'll always be here for you, Dad," she said quietly. "I realize that things have been difficult between you two. We've noticed that for a long time." "Yes," Andrei added, looking calmer now, "I can see that you're different, Dad. You seem calmer than you used to be." These words surprised me a little, but I realized it was true. I really felt calm, maybe for the first time in years. The decision to leave the past behind and move on gave me a sense of freedom that I had long lost. And now, as I sat next to my children, I knew that my journey ahead would be different, new, but real, and it would also include them. We talked some more, and I told them about my plans, that I was planning to travel, that I wanted to try new opportunities that might benefit me. I felt that they supported me, and that was the most important thing for me. Before I said goodbye, I took their hands and said, "Remember that no matter how our life with your mother develops, you remain the most important to me. I will always be there for you, I will always support you in any situation." We hugged, and this hug became for me the ultimate symbol of our connection, a connection that, despite all the changes, remained unshakable. After the hug, we sat together for a while longer, each of us thinking about what we had said. I could see both relief and sadness in the children's eyes. They understood that our life together with their mother was over, but at the same time they seemed to feel that I had made the right choice. Andrei was the first to break the silence by asking, "Dad, how do you feel now that, well, that you've decided to leave?" I thought for a moment, pondering the question. To be honest, it was a hard decision, but every day I felt better because I knew it was the right one. I decided to tell you the truth. You know, Andre, I feel calmer and more confident than before. Yes, it was hard, and it's still not easy. But now I know that I have the opportunity to build a life that belongs only to me. And this path may not be easy, but it gives me a new meaning, you know? So, as strange as it may sound, I feel better than ever in our life together. Alia, listening to my words, looked at me with some kind of warmth and understanding. I like seeing you like this, Dad, she said, smiling. It doesn't mean I'm happy about breaking up with Mom, but maybe now you can find what you've always been looking for. And maybe we can also discover something new in our relationship. I nodded gratefully. The thought that our relationship with our children could take on new meaning and depth gave me inspiration and strength. We were silent for a while, enjoying the moment of peace that now accompanied me instead of my previous worries. You can come to me with any questions, anytime, I said, looking at one of them and then the other. Even if we are no longer with your mother, I will always be with you in my heart, and you know it. After these words, I saw Andre's face lighten a little. He seemed thoughtful, and I felt that he still had something left to say. Dad, he finally said, leaning forward, do you have a feeling that I don't know, that you were missing something in your marriage? I'm just wondering what caused all this. I was silent, thinking about his question. This was an important moment when I had to be as honest as possible, not hiding the truth but not blaming Alicia either. After all, I didn't want them to see our breakup as a blame game, because the situation was more complicated than a simple, someone's to blame, scheme. Andre, it's not that I lacked something, I began cautiously, most likely, your mother and I are just different people. When we first started our relationship, we had a lot in common. But over time, our values and priorities began to differ. And, you know, it's normal for people to grow up and change, but sometimes they diverge in different directions. Maybe we had gone our separate ways a long time ago, but we didn't want to admit it. I could see that they were both listening intently, trying to understand the complexity of our lives. These were difficult topics, but I knew that children have a right to the truth, even if it is not always pleasant. I respect your mother, I continued, and I will always be grateful to her for the years we spent together. But sometimes the greatest respect is to give a person the opportunity to be happy on their own. I don't want to put her in a framework in which she feels uncomfortable, and I can't stay in that framework anymore. Alia took my hand and squeezed it lightly. We understand, Dad. We will always be with you. Your happiness is important to us. And if you feel good on your new path, we will support you. After all, we are all adults, and we understand that life does not always work out as we plan. I felt better when I heard her words. I knew that even in this gap we could find a new unity and understanding. And this was exactly what I wanted, not to distance myself from them because of personal problems, but, on the contrary, to get closer, becoming closer and more honest with each other. We spent some more time together, discussing small things and telling them about our plans. I shared with them the idea of trying to live in another city, starting a new business, or perhaps doing something that I had always been interested in but never had enough time for. They listened with interest, giving me advice and supporting me. After this conversation, I felt extremely light and happy. I saw that my children, despite all the difficulties, remained a reliable support for me. Their support was the final confirmation for me that I had chosen the right path, deciding to leave the past behind and start a new chapter in my life. When we said goodbye and went our separate ways, I felt the warmth of our embrace and peace of mind for a long time. It was the end of one big chapter and at the same time the beginning of a new one. And now, with self-confidence and the support of my children, I was ready to move on. Also, I could not tell my children that it was my mother who betrayed me and wanted to leave. It would not be manly, not in my principles. The sadness that had long been a part of my life gave way to hope. I knew that there would be many more challenges ahead, but now I had the strength and desire to overcome them. It was a new life that started right here, from this moment. Some time passed after I left, and I got used to my new life, enjoying the feeling of freedom and independence. Meanwhile, Alicia was left alone with her decision and her new circumstances. She stayed with the one she chose instead of me, her boss, who promised her a bright future and a stable career. But the reality was far from her expectations. One day, when Alicia was in the office, her boss, the same one for whom she had sacrificed her marriage, suddenly called her in. She walked into his office expecting more advice or perhaps even plans for the future that the man she saw herself living with had promised her. "Alicia," he began, not looking at her, "we need to talk. I am planning some changes in the company, and it concerns you." Alicia's heart sank. All of her hopes and plans were tied to this man and the new reality she was imagining. She thought he understood and appreciated her, but his tone did not bode well. "Changes? What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice confident. He looked up and continued without hesitation. "I think that our relationship has reached a dead end. We made a choice, but now I see that this choice was hasty. And I've decided that it's better for us to leave things as they are and not have any more relationships outside of work." Alicia felt herself panicking. She had never expected this turn of events. In her mind, everything was supposed to be different. They were supposed to stay together, she would continue to work in a promoted position, and her life would become stable and predictable. But now it all seemed like an illusion. "You promised me that we would be together," she replied with a hint of disappointment. "You said yourself that you saw me as your partner." He shrugged his shoulders, showing complete indifference. "Yes, maybe I thought that once, but things change in business. And I can't let personal relationships influence my decision. Moreover, I have a wife, and I'm not going to change anything in my family life." For Alicia, it was a blow. She felt like her hopes and plans were being shattered. Everything she had sacrificed for, everything she had given up and risked for, now seemed useless. She was left alone, without support and without the future her boss had promised her. When she returned home after this conversation, she sat down on the couch, wrapped in a sense of deep disappointment and despair. She had lost everything that was dear to her, and now she saw it more clearly than ever. All the moments she had shared in her marriage with Christoph flashed before her, all the happy times they had been together, when they had supported each other and dreamed of a future together. And suddenly she realized that she had made a fatal mistake. She had exchanged true values for illusory promises, losing what really mattered. Now she wanted Christoph back, wanted to find in him the support and stability she had been missing. But was there still a chance for that? The next day, after collecting her thoughts, Alicia decided to find Christoph and try to talk to him. She realized that she desperately needed his support and wanted to get her old life back if he agreed. Alicia hesitated for a long time about going to Christoph, because she felt that after everything that had happened, he might not want to have anything more to do with her. However, her desperation and disappointment in her boss pushed her to take a decisive step. In the end, she decided to try. She had to at least talk to him and express her remorse. She learned from her children that Christoph now lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. She gathered her courage and went there, hoping that he would at least listen to her. As she approached the door of his apartment, Alicia felt her heart begin to race. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. The door opened and she saw the familiar figure of Christoph, who looked much calmer and more confident than she remembered. His gaze was cold and impenetrable, but there was no hatred in it, only indifference, which hurt Alicia more than any words. "Hello, Alicia," he said, not inviting her in. "Hi, Christoph," she replied, a little embarrassed. "Can I talk to you? I would like to explain something and ask you for one thing." Christoph was silent for a few seconds, looking at her with some doubt, but then he nodded and stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Alicia timidly crossed the threshold and looked around, noticing the simplicity and neatness of his new home. Everything was new, with no trace of their shared past. "Okay," he said, sitting down on the couch and motioning for her to sit across from him. "I'm listening." Alicia sat down, trying to collect her thoughts. It was hard for her to begin, because all her words seemed to be a pale reflection of the true feelings that were raging in her soul. "Christoph, I came here because I realized that I had made a terrible mistake," she began, barely holding back her tears. "I thought I could find something better, that I could build a new life with another man, but it all turned out to be an illusion. The boss I was looking for, he left me. He had no serious intentions. I was just another entertainment for him. Christoph was silent, just nodding, as if everything she said only confirmed his own guesses. I realized that I lost the most valuable thing I had, Alicia continued. I lost you, our family, our stability. And I want to get it all back if you give me a chance. I made a mistake, and I'm ready to fix it. Christoph looked at her, and she felt his indifference only deepen. He didn't look angry or hurt, but his gaze remained cold and distant, as if she were a stranger to him. Alicia, he said calmly, I understand how you feel now, and I can see that you are remorseful. But you have to understand that for me it is already in the past. I went through pain and disappointment, I let go of everything that was between us. I started a new life, and now I have no desire to return to what I left behind. Alicia felt her heart clench at his words. She tried to find some arguments that could change his mind, but as she looked at him, she realized that he was no longer the man she had known. But you loved me, she whispered, trying to hide her tears, we went through so much together. Can't we try to start over? Christoph smiled sadly, and in his smile, there was a deep fatigue. Yes, I loved you once, he answered quietly, but you betrayed that love, you chose another life. And I learned to live without you. I learned to be happy on my own, not depending on you and your decisions. I don't need to go back to the past anymore, because I have found myself in a new future. His words were like a final blow to her. She realized that his decision was final and that he would no longer allow her to influence his life. She had lost him, and now there was only the bitter emptiness of realizing this. I see, she said quietly, feeling tears streaming down her cheeks, I see that nothing can be changed. Christoph just nodded. I wish you all the best, Alicia, he said, standing up and indicating that the conversation was over, I hope you can find your way and be happy. But our life together is over, and I no longer intend to return to what I have already left behind. Alicia stood there for a moment, unable to believe what was happening, and then, with a heavy sigh, she headed for the door. She felt like every step she took was moving her away from him forever. Once outside, she stopped to catch her breath, feeling that she had lost her last chance to bring back the past. Now she was left alone with her choices and the consequences of her decisions. Those whom she had tried to use, those whom she had betrayed for the sake of a phantom future, had now abandoned her. And she could only accept this as the inevitable payback for her actions. Alicia stood on the street, looking at the world that no longer seemed so bright and attractive to her. She realized that she was all alone, and she would have to accept it as the inevitable result of her own decisions. After breaking up with Alicia, my life gradually took on a new direction. I arranged my apartment, continued to work, play sports and discover new interests that had previously remained in the shadows. However, despite all the changes and positive developments, there was a deep scar in my heart that reminded me of the past. I managed to build a healthy daily routine, meet friends, even travel to neighboring cities. However, every time someone mentioned the possibility of a new relationship, I felt something akin to panic. After everything that had happened, the thought of a new relationship seemed not just distant, but dangerous. I avoided the topic of love over and over again, convincing myself that a quiet and lonely life was better for me than new emotional risks. Pavel, with whom I continued to maintain a warm relationship, repeatedly teased me about becoming a loner. He strongly advised me to try to trust others again, to find a woman who could bring joy to my life. But I only joked, saying that I was fine the way I was. I made excuses to him and, frankly, to myself, that my life was now stable and predictable, exactly the way I had always wanted it to be. Deep down, however, I realized that my fear of a new relationship was keeping me from truly moving forward. My inner anxiety prevented me from opening up to other people, and even friendships sometimes seemed like too much of a challenge. Sometimes I even caught myself thinking that it was easier for me to close myself off in my world than to allow someone to enter my life and possibly cause me new pain. It would seem that I was able to put the past behind me, but in reality, a part of my heart was still held captive by old wounds. Weeks passed and I got used to my new routine. It seemed that my life had finally become orderly. I worked, played sports, spent time with friends, and it gave me a certain sense of stability and peace. But at the same time, I felt that something was still missing. As if there was some unfilled void in me, and I couldn't figure out what exactly I needed to fill it. One evening, during a meeting with Powell, he hinted at the same topic again. "Christoph, I understand that after all this you feel a certain distrust," he said, looking at me with sincere sympathy, "but you can't close yourself off from everyone. Is it good for you to live so alone?" I smiled, trying to make a joke, but this time I had no jokes. Pavel was right, and I realized it. Perhaps I had been fooling myself when I said that loneliness was my choice, and not a hidden need for security that I was hiding behind to avoid new disappointments. When I returned home that evening, I picked up the book that Paul had once given me. It was the same book that had once helped me get out of depression and find new directions in life. It was on a shelf, and I hadn't turned its pages for a long time because I thought I had completely passed that stage. But now, flipping through the pages, I found words in it again that seemed very close to me. The author said that after severe trauma, people are often afraid to allow themselves happiness because they subconsciously believe that they do not deserve it, or that happiness always brings pain. I paused at this section, feeling my heart shrink a little. I read. Life always has risks. But living withdrawing from the world is the worst of them all. True courage is to open your heart again, despite all the painful experiences. This is the path to healing. These words touched me. I realized that I continue to live in fear, which keeps me captive to the past. And that maybe I should take a new step. The more I reread the book, the clearer I realized that I was limiting my own life. The fear that remained after the betrayal had become my personal prison, and although I seemed confident and determined on the outside, deep down I was afraid to open up. This book reminded me once again that the happiness I craved lay on the other side of that fear. Over the next few days, I reflected on this and decided that it was time to finally take a step towards the world. Of course, this did not mean that I had to plunge into a new relationship right away. I just had to stop hiding. I decided to start with simple things, allowing myself to talk to people more, to go out, to meet new people without prejudice, and maybe even make new friends. One evening I joined a group of Pavlo's friends at a party where he introduced me to several women. I felt a little nervous, but at the same time I noticed that after I allowed myself to just relax, I felt good talking to them. I realized that not all new acquaintances have to end in a relationship, they can simply bring joy and warmth that I was missing. Meeting Sylvia, one of the women I met that evening, was particularly memorable. She was simple, sincere, and her laughter helped me forget about my internal barriers. We spent a lot of time talking, laughing, and sharing our stories. It was unexpectedly easy, and I felt at ease around her. On the way home, I thought that maybe I was ready to let new people into my life. That maybe life can be pleasant and interesting even after all the disappointments and betrayals. The book reminded me of the strength I had felt when I first started to deal with my pain, and now I was ready to move on. Returning home, I felt that step by step I was freeing myself from my old fears. I may not have known where this path would lead me, but I was ready to trust it. And who knows, maybe the real story of my new life is just beginning. Thank you to everyone who has been with me throughout this story. I hope you found it interesting to walk this path with me from betrayal to new love and true freedom. If you liked it, don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments. I will be very pleased to read your impressions and hear what you think about this journey. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new stories, which I hope will be no less exciting for you. We apologize for any pronunciation errors. This story was narrated using third-party services, and I am still learning as I am not a native speaker. Your understanding is very valuable to me, and I am always working on getting better for you. Thank you again for your support and see you soon on the channel.